somewhere. So the main topic is the conference Philosophy of Scientific Experimentation, held in this April in Pittsburgh, famous center for philosophy of science. So the bottom line, with one sentence I picked from all the talks, more relevant to physics. No experiment result without simulation.
Oh.
That's a conclusion by Margaret Morrison, is a well-known philosopher of science. So it is based on analysis of LHC practices.
So if you do not have simulations, you are not respected at all.
Yes.
Go out.
Yes.
Do your simulations.
Yes. Yes. So
Gedanken experiments are forbidden completely.
yes, yes. But I will have some questions. So I will talk few words. Just what's history? Not a lot of history. Just it's not historical talk. It's just some introduction to the series of conferences. And in red, my black is just text, and red my silly questions, which came to my mind when I was attending this conference. So first. Natural sciences are experimental. It is just commonplace. But the question is, what is the difference in our contemporary experiment, and was it the same many years ago? Obviously not. And Alexei knows much more about the antiquity things. But the basic thing is that in antiquity, during Aristotle times, and even 10,000 years since then, during scholastic times, Middle Ages, people just used to think that what surrounds us is kind of harmonious cosmos, and it is perfect by itself. It contains all laws inside it, and just our thought just extracts the knowledge from it. It's not to say that people didn't experiment in antiquity times. They did, but there was no experimental science, no physics as we know, as we understand it. Now, they didn't need this. The world was different. The world picture was different at that time, much different. And only in modern times, since, Galileo was the first modern time physicist, experimentalist in our sense. So, since then, not cosmos or nature as something great, but only individual and separate phenomena come to the center of the scientist's attention. So only individual phenomena like objects or processes, were separated from natural backgrounds, transferred to laboratory, and undergone different actions and influences in order to experimentally investigate their behavior, their phenomena. That's Galileo, falling bodies, and experiments of Bernoulli and Coulomb, Ampere, electric charge, and so on. People do three things first. They prepared a state, like Galileo had to bring his ball on the top of the building, and then absorb the phenomenon, or bring the bodies in interaction, and then measure the result, measure times, measure distance, measure something.
To separate the phenomena. This is the
Yes.
big point of
Yes.
starting from Galileo. From ancient times, everything was considered like open. Just see, as Aristotle says, see and you will see the truth by normal eyes. Although eyes should be good, but normal eyes is enough. But starting from Galileo, it's an art of proper questioning. You should separate phenomena to extract it somehow from the infinite net of connection, everything with everything.
Yes, because people change the view of the world, the understanding of the world. It's not longer a cosmos, but it is a cosmos of individual phenomena. Each you can kind of prepare and study. I absolutely agree with Alexei. But about this field, even as experiment, as we know, it started at Galileo times. Philosophy of Scientific Experimentation started in the beginning of the 20th century with the work of Pierre Duhem, The Aim and Structure of Physical Theory. he was first who considered experiment and questioned whether I will talk about it a bit about his discussion of experiment of compression of gases. And he observed that theory enters the experimental argument. Theory enters the experimental fact, and that the fact is theory laden. So, and after that, like 70 years passed, and nothing significant was published, and another next revolution started in the 1918th, last century. First of all, it's iron hacking, representing and intervening. That's a big work in support of scientific realism position. I will not discuss it much because that's realism, anti-realism debate. That's a big separate question. It's another hour. But basically, he considered a lot of contemporary, also including contemporary experiments, not only falling bodies, but also electronic gun, for example, and neutral current experiments, other experiments. And when he considered them, he proposed the so-called manipulative argument that the things, the objects are real if we can manipulate them. For example, why electron is real? If we can emit electron and stop electron, we can do something, manipulate with electron. This means it is real. It was his argument. But that's another essential work in philosophy of experimentation. And also there was a number of other authors. For example, Alan Franklin. He is a professor of physics in Colorado Boulder, and he is also a philosopher of science. He published a lot of important works. For example, The Neglect of Experiment. The name itself suggests that the experiment is underrepresented in philosophy of science, underestimated. Because all the discussion of science in philosophy of science, discussion of theories, history of theories, revolutions in theories, and paradigm, theoretical paradigm, and like this. And experiments plays very secondary role in this. So, and in the beginning of this century, Hans Rader, he is a Netherlands philosopher, published a compilation of several works, including Jim Woodward, Rom Har, and other authors on philosophy of scientific experimentation, and concluded it or precluded with his own review of the field. So it's another essential book on this topic. And already 10 years later, we see, in addition to the works of many tens of philosophers in philosophy of experimentation, we see such interesting projects like epistemology at LHC, the project carried out at University of Wuppertal, Germany. They work in close connection with LHC, and they discuss what's happening with Higgs boson issues and theory experimentation connection issue and sociology of science issues and other things. So that's interesting, that science becomes more or less open to philosophy, because before that, mostly until now, that's two very different realms of practices.
The next question.
Yes.
You mentioned that somebody, Franklin, I guess, pointed out that about electrons, that we can, from electron gun, that we can manipulate it.
Hacking.
Hacking. And it means, according to him, our ability to manipulate, that it means that electron is real.
Real, yes.
But for instance, I cannot manipulate the star
Yes.
on the sky. Does it mean that the star is not real?
No, that's another, I will discuss, there's difference between experimentation and observation, because you cannot observe.
Yeah, but this
Of
not,
course,
but
his
reality.
his argument cannot be applied to the stars. It doesn't mean that they are not real, but doesn't mean that they are real. That is not, argument is not applicable to...
So manipulation
to
is not
this.
a criterion for reality.
When it's applicable, it is. For in his view.
So it's a subset.
Yes,
Subset.
it's a subset.
Subset,
Yes.
okay.
But outside, yes.
But if
that's a
somebody
good
can manipulate my dreams, does it mean that my dreams are real?
question. Yeah.
What does it mean that real? If dreams are real,
Yeah.
some master of hypnosis could manipulate my dreams, for instance.
Yes.
Then we have to conclude that my dreams are real.
Yes.
Nothing to tell about my thoughts. My teacher could manipulate my thoughts. So some ideology, some trick ideology could manipulate my thoughts. My
Or
thoughts are also.
neurobiology.
Yeah. Well, then everything is real. What is not
Yeah.
real then?
Yes, absolutely. That's why the realism is not very strong position these days.
So it's essentially nothing.
That's the question.
Whatever we
questions
can
asked,
somehow imagine is already real.
that's very good questions. Well, that's in Europe, but in this country, it is a series of conferences and tens of authors working in the field, and maybe 10. And a series of conferences every 2 years, Philosophy of Scientific Experimentation. The chair of these conferences is Alan Franklin, and I visited conference and I talked to him as an outstanding physicist and philosopher of science, and and that's what's going on in this country. So that's the most interesting event in this subject. So this series of conferences, like kind of put together a number of central questions to the field. Questions asked in philosophy of scientific experimentation. What people are interested in. And the questions are the following. First of all, it's roles of experiment plays in science. Is it only testing of theories, or other roles of experiment? For example, can it discover something or look for new phenomena or something like this? And can the connected question, can the experiment be independent of theory, or is it always theory-led? And what experimental strategies, experimentalists, epistemic strategies, I use some fancy words, but my only ability is to explain in simple words what I see. So basically, don't master this fancy style, but basically, experimentalists can argue that their results are reliable. How to prove them correct? That's the big question, because there are errors in experiments, that's commonplace. And what are similarities and differences between experiments in different sciences? For example, physics and biology. What is common, what is different? And kind of constructivism question. Are new phenomena discovered or created in laboratory? This question arose mostly because of biology issues. 20 or 30 years ago, there were a lot of papers by social scientists about experimental biology. And people argued that what biologists do, they don't study, they create viruses, create molecules, create different objects.
Even cells, new cells.
New cells, absolutely. And then what they do, they distribute it in the outer world. So they make the world their laboratory. They don't discover phenomena, they create phenomena there. And there were several outstanding works about the same issue in physics. And
LHC created a black hole,
Yeah, that's more
At least they
complicated.
tried.
Yes.
Did not
That's-
succeed.
yeah. Yes, and so it's difference between experimentation and observation, for example. And the last question, which I put first, what are the computer simulations? Are they theory or experiment? Which role do they play in experiment? So, and experiment and theory, that's just quickly one of the central questions. That's based on works from many sources and also the series of conferences in previous years. So the goal of experiment is the creation of theory of a phenomenon. So can it precede theory? Can it be held before theory is created or found? Yes, it can. An example is this cosmic microwave background. The two Nobel Prize winners, one of them Wilson. Wilson is not our first director. Wilson, it also R. Wilson, but he's another scientist. So they work on technology in communication between Earth and cosmic objects like satellites and like this. And as a kind of side product of their study, they measure the temperature of the microwave background, and they found that the excess of 3 Kelvin. It was new observation, yes. It was not understood, but didn't make any sense before they found a theory for that, and only after they found theory actually what they found.
But theory preceded experiment in this case,
No,
right?
it doesn't matter. It preceded.
Not for them.
Not for them.
Yes,
not for them.
Yes, they did not know about.
They did not know.
Yes.
But in fact, theory already existed at that time.
But it doesn't matter. It doesn't exist if they don't know.
Yeah, I agree.
Everything can exist.
Yeah, I agree. Just for matter of historical knowledge.
Yes, for historical, yes. George Gamow and 2 other
Aleph,
scientists.
beta, gamma.
Alpha,
Alpha, beta, gamma. Alpha, beta, gamma.
alpha, beta, gamma. Yes. So only after they found the theory, it made sense. They won the Nobel Prize. If there's just excess temperature, everything has excess temperature. Doesn't make any sense. So the goal of experiment, the creation of phenomenal theory, is commonplace. Then, okay, I will probably skip this structure that's also about theory and experiment. And now is about epistemic strategies. Which strategies experimentalists use to prove their experiment is right. Alan Franklin summarized several of such strategies. I would all recommend you to look at Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. And so, but basically, to put it in simple, it is again Hacking's argument about manipulation. One of the strategies is to manipulate the object of study in a known way and observe the response. For example, if you look in a microscope and your sample, if you put in your sample some ink, for example, red ink, and you put it under a microscope and you see the red, that means that you manipulate in known way, that you observe what you actually prepared. That's the argument. That's the argument for the correctness of the apparatus. Experimentalists use this strategy very often. They do calibration of the apparatus. The calibration is a common strategy. And another thing is independent confirmation using different apparatuses. Hans Rader calls this replicability. And my next slide about this conference will be talk on replicability. And that's very common. If we have here D0 and the second one, CDF, and CERN has Atlas and CMS, they measure independently the same. If one sees Higgs, the other should also see.
So there's sort of reproducibility, but not quite. It's different apparatus.
Because what is different apparatus? Different instrumental theories, different way of observation. It's like optical microscope and electronic microscope. You see the same, but different ways. That's an argument for the correctness. Another one is taken from Peter Garrison. It's impossibility to eliminate effect varying instrumental procedure. What it means? Basically, he observed that on some historical examples, that when experimentalists observe some effect, first thing they try to do, they vary parameters, they tweak the apparatus, trying to find correlations between the actions related to, say, instrumental effects or errors or technical nature. Only if they cannot whatever they do, they cannot eliminate the effect. The effect is persistent. Only after that they can claim that they have absorbed and they have measured something. And other strategies are very like kind of secondary, but also important. First is consistency of results. It's obvious results should be consistent. It's often related to also to instrumental theories. Using instruments based on well corroborated theories. For example, why we believe that accelerator works correctly? Because it has a lot of, based on a lot of complex technical theories, but everything can be reduced to Maxwellian laws of electrodynamics, for example. But we know every lamp proves this theory right. So that's why it's well corroborated theory. That's why we believe that if accelerator uses electromagnetism, that it works correctly. That's the use of theories. Then exclusion of sources of errors and alternative explanation. That's just some. It's not kind of logical argument. That's a practical strategy. Of course, you can try at first to explain something in a simpler and a more usual way rather than discovering. Only when you cannot explain whatever you do or find errors in your apparatus, then you can claim.
Maybe just a little comment. This exclusion of alternative explanations, this differs science from philosophy. Philosophy likes different and complementary and contradictory way of thinking. They are accepted actually, but science not. In physics, for instance, if we see two different explanations of phenomena, and one cannot be reduced to another, they are really different. We are definitely know that one of them, at least one of them, is wrong, and we are looking for true one. We know that both cannot be true. In philosophy, both can be true. In fact, philosophy is accepting paradoxical way of thinking.
You know, in physics there are situations when one phenomenon can be explained by several alternative theories.
But reduced one to another.
When theories are underdetermined by data.
Yes, but then you know
data, we can refute one theory and confirm
yes,
the
but
other.
you can accept a hypothesis as many as you can, of course, and you should accept it. Yeah. But only one, if they contradict one to another, only one of them.
When you want to get more data to understand.
So then you will distinguish which one is not correct. Maybe all of them are wrong. This is okay, but they can at least two different.
Yes, although there is a paradigm issue here.
This is a way of
theories.
Difference between science.
Because you know, there's one of the arguments against that still we know there's electromagnetism, but there are still theories of ether.
Still,
there are still people who support and who develop ether theories.
The Flat Earth Society?
Uh,
The Flat Earth Society?
I don't know exactly, but there are scientists who just develop the theory and they apply it and they
It works.
It works in some extent. So that's paradigm question. Then statistical criteria, but the statistical criteria is very interesting. You know, several years ago, to make a discovery, you needed 3 sigma, then 4 sigma, now already 5 sigma. That's a criteria, but it's not very well defined. That's and first replicability, and one of the talks at this conference by John Norton. John Norton is the director of the Center of Philosophy of Science at Pittsburgh University, and he is an organizing committee member. He's a well-known philosopher of science. So he works on a project. First, his thesis, his question. He asks, is replicability a principle of inductive logic? He participates in a large project which aims to justify that there are no universal principles of inductive logic. Such principles as you have for example, are established for deductive logic, like excluded middle rule, for example. His argument, he aims to prove that there are no such rules, no such principles for inductive logic. And everything in inductive logic is determined by context, by background facts, local facts. And his thesis, common in experimental science's requirement of reproducibility of experimental result cannot be reduced to a principle of inductive logic. How he argued for that? He discussed several historical examples. For example, he discussed examples of experiments where experimental result, new result, was accepted as true one, even without any replicability. Just one result and people accepted it. And other situations where people replicated result, but it was not accepted. Based on these examples, he argues that background facts, context of experiment, just more knowledge about who, how, when, why carried out each particular experiment, this context, not logical, is sufficient to support reliability of experimental
But how is it possible that nothing was reproduced? Once something was observed only once and already accepted by the community. This I cannot even imagine. I don't know example.
Yes, he has examples. Yes, I just to be short to cover many different topics. But he has a website and a lot of papers on this website. This is a big project. It's not first his talk on this subject, so we can look there. So there are some examples. Only one. That's my interpretation of only one. What I saw. So maybe there's not only one, but two. Well, no, not two. Two is already replicability. But sometimes a fact accepted without replication. That's one. So my question: are these background facts always sufficient? Can it be a rule that background facts determine acceptance of the result by community? I don't think that's so. It is so, but it is important why and where they can be accepted. For example, Higgs boson, or something like this, or whatever, can it be accepted without replication? Maybe we don't need two detectors. Okay, maybe we need just one, only Atlas, or one only CMS, and a lot of background facts, and that's cheaper than build two detectors. Okay. Well, that's the question. Can it be made a rule?
CDF made a claim that there was a
Signal.
when
Yes.
when you would have believed, and now we know it wasn't true. So
Yeah.
that's why you need
Yes.
reproducibility is quite important.
Yes.
Even if the background is good, because I those guys try to do a good job.
Yes. Yes. That's absolutely true. That's the same question I'm asking. Okay. Next topic. Simulations are experiments. This is a big discussion during last 10 or 20 years, whether simulations are more like give more knowledge, more reliable knowledge than experiments, or not, or experiments. The most straightforward point of view that experiments provide more reliable knowledge, more new knowledge, but simulations are not so much knowledge, or if at all. So that's a straightforward. But Park argues against this argument. This is surprise claim. Yes, we discover it's surprise. It's unpredictable, and there are surprises in experiments. And question is, are there surprises in simulations?
It happens from time to time. Not as much,
Yeah.
but
Chaos theory was understood because of simulations.
which series again?
Chaotic systems.
Chaotic systems, right.
Just by changing a little bit
Right,
of the
exactly.
starting condition, you have completely
Yes.
different events. Was just by simulations.
Right.
Yeah.
They
So-
started,
so, yeah.
it all started from mathematics actually. And numerical mathematics. I forgot the name of pioneers of those. It's like 30s or 40s of the last century. And these guys, just two French people, I don't remember and they did actually numerical, just calculation, a lot of calculation. They realized the very strange features of sort of like Mandelbrot, not Mandelbrot, but some sets like Mandelbrot. And they were surprised what happens. Very chaotic. Actually, they started it. They started it. Exactly started from simulations, in fact.
Yeah.
Although it was not called simulations at that time, they played with some mathematical objects, but in fact it was sort of simulation.
Yeah.
So that's by the way, that's a very interesting example which was not discussed. This question to discuss because surprise claim is false as generalization. So this means simply put that sometimes simulations can surprise us, nevertheless. And two reasons. First of all, unexpected behavior of simulation system, and then hidden mechanisms or causal factors. Unexpected behavior is relevant for computer simulations. For example, her example, if simulation is using model not zero, simulation doesn't understand the details of the simulation code. That's why she is getting surprised. The second, high-level languages. For example, if you use contemporary software like I don't know, framework software or whatever, if you program it in high-level language, you can be surprised by low-level things which you don't know. And the other thing, highly complex models written by teams. If there is a kind of division of labor, and different people describe, encode different parts, then the user cannot understand all of them. And that's not a novel argument, because I found such kind of explanation in a book published 10 years ago by Paul Humphreys, very well-known philosopher of science. He called this epistemic opacity of simulations. They are not epistemically transparent because of the complexity.
Remember Y2K problem?
Yes.
14 years ago.
Yes.
It was a Y2K problem.
Oh.
Y2K. People were obsessed by that. Something could happen. We don't know this computer. They do not.
Yes, we don't know what
It's
could
exactly the
happen.
case of opacity
Yes.
of simulations. We can expect whatever from these black boxes.
Yes.
Nobody understands really this.
So, but what is about chaotic systems and not very clear. Is that unexpected behavior is because of unexpected behavior, or just because of hidden mechanisms? Because the argument is that in computer simulations, it is only unexpected behavior which is relevant, like complexity, not hidden mechanisms. Because when you program the code, there is nothing hidden for you because of just epistemic reasons. Only can be hidden because of division of labor or something like this.
No, for you it also can be hidden. You will forget tomorrow what at least happens with me already. When I take my old program, I already don't remember what is there.
Again, if I remember correctly, in that case it was a change of the precision that caused, the same initial condition caused a big change of the results. So maybe
Yeah.
you're not aware
Exactly.
what's happening.
Yeah.
The same input and a very different result.
So, but as for non-computer simulations, agent-based simulations, yes, we know this. Agent-based. It's like if you use that will be in the next talk. It's like using, for example, animals to reproduce human behavior, like using rats to simulate what people do. Yes, that's agent-based. So there are hidden mechanisms she used, and she shows an example of discovery in genome studies when people try to using something like a model, and using it as a model, they unexpectedly discovered some new behavior. So I would distinguish here this: they try to use as a model, But actually it was not a model, it was a real experiment when they discovered something. And she says actually the same. And the surprise in simulation is productive, but valid scientific inferences are only possible if we eliminate sources of surprise. Okay, we can use something as a model only when we know all mechanisms. If we can surprise us, otherwise that's not a model. It's a kind of surprise. And this is my question: how if there are hidden mechanisms? For example, some mechanisms in rats which do not correspond to humans, for example. And using rats as humans, we will just be misled. Is there a way to prove that agent-based simulation has no surprises before we use it? Or say, can animal models always be used reliably? That's important for biology sciences, for medicine. People use models, rats, to emulate people, but is it reliable? If it has surprises, it can surprise us eventually. The medication or something can surprise us.
How can you conclude that they are reliable? You never know.
Yeah, but there is a next talk. Next talk by Atanasova. So all people from US universities. Well, so the thesis: experimental modeling in neurobiology employs calibrating animal models to establish validity of claims about relevant human conditions. So, how people try to ensure that the animal models are right for people, for humans. They calibrate, like experimentalists calibrate their apparatus, biologists calibrate the animals. Basically, the argument, she tried to build a rebuttal for another argument that often occurring argument against the biology sciences, that different experimental protocols in neurobiology produce different laboratory effects. So every laboratory in biology has own idiosyncrasy. So everybody has own protocols, own understanding of what's happening there. How can they transfer this to real world? Because there is no clear correspondence. And models are valid very locally. Something for something valid. But as a general statement, they can't be valid. Because reliability and validity of models are trade-offs. That's the usual argument. But Atansova argues that people calibrate, biologists calibrate, first of all, animal models calibrated against multiple factors to reproduce known effects, like in experimental apparatus. Different animal models are cross-checked to produce compatible results. And identical animal models are tested in different laboratories.
But how can you calibrate animal models with humans? You should then have humans
She
at your
actually
hands to make experiments. Huh? How otherwise you can calibrate?
she showed a funny slide. Slide, two photos. One like full chick, and the other like cock, adult chicken. Okay, so and the young chick was like brave and joyful, looked very joyful, and the old cock was kind of depressed. They kind of isolated this young chicken from other chickens and observed how it was growing. And when it grew, it became depressed. They compared this to people behavior. Chicken do the same, people do the same. That's it was kind of the calibration.
Well,
Yeah.
maybe
So
a bit more, few more factors.
yes.
The problem with loneliness, yes, it's more general. Loneliness is more general than human, right? It's animal. If animal is lonely, animal will suffer.
Yeah, but you can be depressed also in a
Yes,
there are
of
a lot
course.
of people around. So, I mean, we are
Yes.
out of factors.
Yeah. So, and her bottom line thesis that integration of conversion results produces knowledge that extends farther than each individual laboratory context. That's I don't understand fully, because what means, my question, what means further? Because, for example, if you, that question happened to me after I heard the previous talk by Park. Because, for example, you calibrate chicks to people for anxiety. You observe multiple factors, multiple symptoms for anxiety. They converge in different laboratories. You compare different animals. You compare chicks and cows, how they get depressed. And it comes out that corresponds to the people as well. You can compare identical animal models, chickens in different labs, and they do the same. You calibrate them for anxiety. But if you try to extend further, for example, after the model is calibrated, you try to use them to study flu. And flu will be different because of hidden mechanisms you don't know. That means that this is too much general thesis that extends further than individual laboratory context. Contexts are different. It's too general statement. So, and the last big thing is that's the bottom line and the primary sentence of this presentation. Margaret Morrison, her thesis: there is no experimental result without simulations. First of all, she discusses some old debates on the topic. Old debates are what people usually argue standardly. Why experiments are different from simulations? Because experiments possess some materiality, and simulations refer only to abstract things. So that's, but materiality is not so clear argument. She studies the role of simulation in Higgs searches at LHC, Atlas and CMS. And she says that reliance on simulation undermines the sharp division between simulation and experimentation. So her thesis was the following, big letters on her slide, that simulation is a part of experimentation. That's, for us, it's obvious. We all know that simulation is a part of our experimentation.
Only for physics, for biology, for instance.
They also simulate a lot.
Simulate by other animals or what? Or this
Not only, they use a computer too.
But not in every, at least, field of biology. Many
I think
study of anxiety, for instance, how you could make numerical simulations
Yes,
of anxiety or loneliness of these chickens.
Yes.
Lonely chicken, not simulation.
I agree that there is a lot of sciences and a lot of fields where computer simulation is not applicable.
Yeah,
not,
so this studies
not
at least
useful.
cannot be universal.
Yes, that's about my red lines. For computer simulations, only in sciences where computer simulations are used, where they use
Where you look at these numbers, at least where numbers play a role.
Yes, so that's about LHC, about Higgs studies. So how to establish legitimacy of simulation? First of all, she cites a well-known work actually by Oberkampf. I don't think, probably in English it's not Oberkampf. It's another pronunciation of this word, no? But so anyway, Oberkampf. He is a scientist of Sandia Lab, and a very well-known scientist about verification and validation of computer codes. They validate and verify a lot of computer codes and create many computer codes for different proposals. So, and verification of algorithms is not enough. You cannot just confine yourself with verifying the correctness of encoding of particular algorithm. What you also need to validate versus experiments. So special validation experiments when some experimental apparatus built not in order to study new effects, but just to verify the computer code, like a prototype of something. That's validation. And simulations are part of experimentation. So what she showed on her slide is one of the slides was, physics list of giant 4 code, widely used at LHC. Physics list, a lot of parameters, a lot of models, a lot of everything. Shows, look what people do studying Higgs boson. That's an important part of the business. And she states that interplay between experimentation and simulations are necessary because of this interplay. My silly question, compare summer and mosquitoes. When it is summer, there is a lot of mosquitoes. When you see mosquitoes, there is a summer close. So there is an interplay between summer and mosquitoes. But does it mean if you eliminate mosquitoes, summer will not come? So
would be a better summer.
Yes. Yes. Does interplay entail necessity? It's not clear for me whether it's so. There is an interplay, yes, this definitely. We all know this in contemporary physics. So, and finally, just several other talks, just shortly. They are not discussed so in detail, but there was a talk on equivalence principle tests, Etwash experiments on gravitation. So the results is mostly about experiments, interpretation of experiments. She states that results support the geometric interpretation of gravity, but relation between theory and experiment should be made more explicit by experimentalists. So, a very interesting talk on biology was by Karl Kraewer. First of all, it was very artistic. It was really artistic presentation. And he had an excellent video presentation when he showed biology experiments, neurobiology, on intervening to brain function of rats, for example. He showed how rats are moving after biological influences, and so it was very biologically, very empirically rich, just presentation of present state of the art in neurobiology. So, the talk by Creel, Machine Learning as Experiment. The statement...
Sorry, intervention means that like intervention...
In brain, yes.
In brain.
Yes. You can use neuroactive chemicals or using surgical manipulations.
Mm-hmm. So in this respect, when I'm thinking about intervention in brain.
Yes, intervention, that's this. Yes, she has some more general statement, but in fact, directly he means the intervention in brain functions. Machine learning as experiment. The statement is that machine learning can help discover new phenomena. For example, searching in data sets. And just today I found an information about a project on search for Higgs boson using machine learning systems in data sets. So that's machine learning systems can produce new knowledge. That's what the statement. And Melinda Fagan, as a philosopher of biology, I saw several of her works. She's very critical scientist on biology practices, on sociology of biology, and so her talk was about stem cells experiment. So she argues for her position for many years. Actually, her statement that empirical claims about stem cells are uncertain because of two things. Because of a concept, features of the very concept of stem cells, what stem cells are. That's an uncertain concept. And about general facts about experiments in stem cell biology. Because of this, she claims that all empirical claims about stem cells are uncertain.
Say why? Like this, I don't understand why all of them are uncertain. I could understand some claims compared to why she's saying, insisting all the claims about stem cells are uncertain.
What the people usually do, they consider several examples, And based on several examples, they induce more
But
generals.
that's how we always do it in science. We
Yes.
always have
They
some
always,
specific
yes,
experiment.
they do this unless somebody provides a counter example.
Yes, yes.
That's
But this is typical scientific
yes,
execution.
that's a normal practice in the field. So Paula Grabowski, she's a biologist. It was actually a first talk, invited presentation by a biologist from Pittsburgh University on perspectives or on RNA. That was kind of biological talk, a lot of news in RNA biology, and her claim is that biologist is part of biology. So that's very dependent on the particular personal effects of the biologist who study biology.
Which respect, what is the meaning of this statement? Biology is a part of biology.
Basically, the meaning is that the role of a practitioner is very important to make claims in biology, to prove something, to observe something in biology. Individual characters of the biologists are very important. So that's a
Individuality.
role of practitioner. Yes.
In what way is it
She
important?
basically her talk was mostly about biology. Well, the claim was that the kind of discoveries in biology were accepted and it changed the entire paradigm because of the very prominent practitioners who actually produced the results eventually.
Are you talking about charisma and fancy language, or are you talking about
No, that's
something
not
else?
about it. They all possess a fancy language, I think. So. I think that that's role of personality in history.
It's about personality, individuality.
Individuality, scientific individuality, of course. Maybe you need to be charismatic and so on, but it's more about this, more about your knowledge, ways you apply your knowledge, your communicative abilities, and so on. Social factors. Actually, biology is much influenced by social factors.
So if you're able to present your work in such a way that is more exciting to people, then even if it's maybe scientifically or objectively less important, it will have a stronger impact on the scientific community. Is that what she's saying?
It's close to that. She didn't discuss, that's how I understand, she didn't discuss examples of personal behavior promoting your knowledge, of course, no, but that implies something close to abilities is straightforward, ability to communicate your discovery, abilities to interact, for example.
Well, this I would call rather social abilities. It's not quite biology. Biological respect, I have cells, for instance, some blood pressure, whatever. If you will express biologist as an object for biology, it's not about social studies, social affairs or whatever. It's about DNA, for instance, or blood circulation or
I think it's making a point that our understanding of biology depends of who is making claims.
This is the
think
point.
it is-
Okay.
Because when we
This is your point, no? Or her point.
Both of you are right. So there's a big series of work by social scientists and social constructivists about natural scientists, and they demonstrated the influence of social factors on the progress in sciences. That's the same. So, and the last talk I put here by Mikita about how parsimony biases experimental design in comparative cognition. So the statement is that simplicity is the value in sciences. And because of that, many scientists, at least in the cognitive sciences, they seek for simpler theories and simpler experimental designs to verify the theories. So
This is a bias.
this is the bias. Yes, this is the bias to simplicity.
Did he say it in a positive key or a negative key? Did he say it was a problem?
Well, that was not discussed. There were several examples how the models are simpler. Models of choice are the simplest among the possible. But it was not. It is an interesting question. It was not discussed the effect of this. For example, if you do discovery in the cognitive science and then you apply it to solving the real world human problems, how simpler models differ from more complex models. That was not discussed, but that's an interesting question.
I think we are doomed to have bias for simpler models first, and then it is also a belief for our elegance of laws of nature, for instance, that they cannot be extremely complicated, at least in physics. If I will assume this bias to simpler model as just my own weakness, nothing more, then I should conclude that the world is cannot be understood, is not understandable, not theoretizable, because if all the theories are coming would come in my consideration with the same weight, great majority of those theories would be extremely complicated, so I would not be able to understand anything. So that's the world would be unthinkable then.
And that's a Occam issue.
Yes, Occam issue.
Occam,
yes.
and I think that's the position of this work is to demonstrate that this Occam, this reductionism tendency is applicable and is practiced in cognitive sciences.
Yes, but reductionism, I think, is a little bit different. Reductionism is a belief in the unity of knowledge.
Yes.
So the science always is trying to reduce to fundamental principles, to smallest number of fundamental principles.
Yeah.
This is reductionism.
Yeah,
So
that's
this
what-
is also a camp.
Yes.
But
that's
it's also in the heart of it is the belief on the unity of knowledge.
Yes, correct. So, so my conclusion, that was an outstanding conference, a lot of coffee and donuts, and you can drink coffee in the seminar room. That's very convenient, for example. So that's common for this kind of conferences, and so thanks to Professor Franklin, an outstanding scientist, I had a pleasure to meet him personally, and Dr. Slobodan Perovic. You know, that's a very difficult thing because a bit differently from that we have in physics. Every talk ends in more than 10 questions, so some 15 questions, you know. People ask a lot of questions about everything, and it's a big deal and a big work of moderator to take the control over all this. Otherwise, it can be just endless talks. So, but they need to keep it in time.
What is the percentage? Could we estimate roughly the talk itself and the discussion? 50-50
like 25 minutes talk and 15 minutes questions.
So it is more than we have. So
Yes.
for questions, I think, the percentage of questions like 40%. 40% of questions.
It was at the conference when I had a talk also in Notre Dame. It was also 25 minutes of talk and then 15 minutes of question. It's the standard. So I think they had also a total of 40 minutes. Out of them, 15 for questions.
Okay.
So that's good thing. So many questions, many topics are discussed, and many more questions appeared after that. So that was very productive and productive conference. Why not host such a conference at Fermilab?
Oh, it would be a great idea. But we already started this work. We are prepared.
But we don't have coffee or donuts.
We did not work enough.
We can ask the directorate if they
Yes,
want to support.
I mean, this just a crazy idea, but why not invite next conference to Fermilab?
I was going to ask you, how many people in philosophy and how many people in science attended it?
Most of people are from philosophy,
Right, but that was my
but
understanding.
there are people who do both things. Scientists who do philosophy. For example, their percentage is less, I think. It's difficult to say, but mostly philosophers, because this is a professional conference. People need to report to keep their regular duties. I think so. But scientists attend, and for example, Alan Franklin, he is a professor of physics, and he also a renowned philosopher of experimentation. So people do both. Some people do both. Most of people are U.S. based. Very few people were from one presenter was from University of Geneva, for example.
Did anything surprise you at this conference? Opened your eyes.
I would say differently. Many talks induced more questions. So, yes, they asked questions. They didn't tell me anything completely new, because before that I read something on the subject. So basically I knew what is it about. But these 4 talks, Norton, Park, Atansova, and Morrison, were the most amazing, and I like the most.
Do you have links to them? No, they publish their talks.
Unfortunately, there are no presentations. Presentations were very interesting, they're very detailed. There are no presentations on the web. There is a book of abstracts on the web.
Only book of abstracts.
If you Google this PSX4
Only abstracts.
conference, PSX4 conference, you will find abstracts and list of speakers. But it would be good if they put also presentations, because
they do not present.
like videos or
Video, yes. We are doing this here, so we are ahead of
We are doing.
Yeah.
So one more question. As far as I understood, if you compare this philosophical community, this community is trying to understand the set of mind of experimentalists, theoreticians, scientists. And what the scientists are doing, they are working like anthropologists, looking on some tribe. What tribe is doing this morning, on this day of summer, for instance, this special day? How do they celebrate the tribal holidays? They just describe they are going after the tribe of scientists, experimentalists, and theoreticians, and simulationists, and just writing down, they are doing this, they are doing that. And then they are publishing their papers about habit of tribes. They are working, I think, like anthropologists. Do you think that it's not, they are doing something else? Except
I think this common accusation of naturalism or like these two philosophers. But what they do currently, many of them have science background or science degree or even practicing scientists. Some philosophers part-time do experimentation in biology, for example.
they themselves are members of the tribe.
They become members. That's the trend. That's the progress. The first and second, they try to discuss epistemology, not just behavior of tribes. Epistemological questions are discussed. So and they have a right to do so as they have experience, personal experience, and this kind of reflective base for doing so.
But does any feedback exist? So I think it is one way, even if they are members of the tribe, It is sort of one-way direction of thought. We are observing and we are writing down, even if we are observing also partly ourselves as a members of the scientific community. And then we are publishing papers, but do those papers influence somehow the scientists? Is any feedback?
I think so. I think, for example, that it is so in this country at least.
In this country?
Yes, in this country. Because the philosophers rather than physics, philosophers are different in different countries. And in this country, I think there is a feedback from this, because people, as I understand, people know ideas, physicists, at least when I see documents of high-level discussions of physics here, they reflect upon the most prominent ideas in philosophy of science.
Somehow.
So somehow physics changes according to new ideas. But it still argues for its own viewpoint, for its own ideas, that physics is much different from humanities. But they reflect upon what they see, and they adjust their programs. For example, I would say that it's my personal impression. It may be wrong, of course, but that these new things which P5 discusses, for example, these drivers, science drivers. These science drivers reflect somehow discussions in philosophy of science.
So it appeared first.
Not from these conferences, of course.
No, this not
exactly. But basically, this division of drivers, like Higgs drivers or rare event drivers or kind of neutrino program or like this, because there is a series of works, for example, for that epistemology or HC group on Higgs, influence of Higgs, effects of Higgs, how Higgs discovery affects physics, contemporary physics. And soon after that, people made the Higgs a driver for science. So they follow somehow what's happening in philosophy. And this is good. Not directly, not literally, they don't borrow words or whatever, but they adhere to ideas.
So scientific community somehow is influenced by philosophy of science community, right?
No. Indirectly.
This is my question.
For me, still open.
Yes, I think so, and I am very pleased that it's so in this country, because to give a counter example, for example, in Russia, philosophy is absolutely different. It's historically descriptive kind of philosopher, and physicists like divided in two categories. Some of them just think that philosophy is something about Plato or Aristotle, which is not interesting and not understood, or others think that it's an absolute crap, which is not worth anything. So that's the attitude, and that's wrong attitude. What's happening here is more rational. Because basically most of philosophers, analytical philosophers, say that analytical philosophy is not just humanities. It's an analytical science that's like mathematics. That's based on logic. That's the same rational attitude.
What can you extract new and interesting for science then from analytical philosophy? If analytical philosophy considers itself as like analysis of, say, scientific language. It takes scientific language, makes them like chemical analysis, like this is hydrogen of scientific language, this is oxygen of scientific language. And then, okay, I know that I am drinking not just water, which I love so much, but some combination of hydrogen and oxygen atoms. How could it help me in science if some results of this analytical philosophy?
Reflecting on language helps you to understand language better. When you understand language, you can do everything better with this language.
Yes, in principle I agree. It's interesting to know examples, I think, in this case. So, but you already gave some example about Higgs boson discovery, like
Yes, and driver thing,
Driver.
because it is accepted during the last three tens of years that science, experimental science, is theory driven, and now they made this drivers explicit. We are driven by this, and this. So that's a kind of reflection.
Did you see any DOE guy in this conference who could try to understand better?
No, that's not DOE business. I think they read somehow. They read somehow.
They
I think yes, they watch for it, but not like not presenting something there. That's separate funding thing.
Understand better what to support, what not.
Yes, if you are asking what was surprising in this view, that's no conference fee.
Ah.
Didn't have to pay anything.
So it was then it was paid by some institution, right? Who
Maybe
paid
they
for
have. I think they have grants or something like this, or this for sure. But this center is organizer of this conference, so it probably pays for it. But it pays for all participants.
Now we know where to take
That's
coffee
nice.
for free. Coffee was good, no? The place to take coffee for free.
You know why we organize our next conference. We go there.
It would be
Okay,
nice
many
if-
thanks,
if it
Vitali.
will.
Very good talk. Thank you.
Thank you.